Hi folks, hello fellow RC flyers. So today's just hopefully a fairly quick video on the B-17 from Hobby King. I want to say at the outset, I want to talk about some of the negatives and some of the positives with it. I want to say at the outset that I do recommend you buy this plane. I think it's a nice plane. I maidened it today. It flew great, but there are some problems with it that I think if you're planning on getting this plane, you need to be aware of, and maybe a gentle little admonition of Hobby King for some of these problems that I think could have been sorted out in the design or the manufacturing stages. It's a great price. I bought it as of this date in 2022. I bought it for $375, and we're talking about a plane that is almost a 74-inch wingspan, 4 engines. It's a big plane. It's impressive, and you know, $375 in this market compared to, you know, something from E-Flight or FMS and so on, it's a lot more money. So I think that's a pretty good price. But you know, you kind of get what you pay for. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the issues. But I will repeat at the outset that I recommend you buying this plane, but there are some problems, and some of them are serious. So let's go over a couple things. I'm going to start with the minor kind of. I'm going to start with some quibbles at first. Number one, some of the trim is not glued on properly. You touch it, you flick it with your finger, it falls off. Like these covers over the ESCs were barely glued on. You know, not a big thing. You can glue it with some hot glue or something or whatever and glue them on. But I did see another video from another gentleman who was very useful, talking about that the actual servo mounting in the fuselage for the elevator and the rudder were not, that plate was not glued on, and it was moving around as he was actuating the servo. So you got to check the surfaces on this thing, because the quality control, I think, in the manufacture of this thing is not great, in my opinion. Two, another thing I found was on the ailerons, one of the hinges was not even glued, and it was moving around, and it had created an egg-shaped hole where the pin hinge went in. So I had to put a toothpick and some epoxy, clip it off, kind of tighten it up a little bit. So that's another thing. The engine wires, right? So the motor wires. So you got your ESCs here, and for every ESC, each ESC feeds one of the 4 motors. Well, on one of the motors, the wire was not fed all the way through, so I had to remove the motor plate and then fish around for the wires, which was very difficult, and then pull the wires out. Again, in the manufacturing process, sloppy, a little annoying. Took quite a bit of time to fish that wire out. Finally fished it out and put it out. More on that wire, by the way, in a minute, because it led to a serious problem. Oh, the other thing was this wing comes in 2 halves in the box, and you glue it together with the aid of a metal, kind of a shaft, a V-shaped shaft, a shaft with a slight dihedral in it to help you align the wings, and that little shaft goes into a slot on each side of the wing. Well, it's metal, and the slots in the wings were not reamed out properly, were not opened up. They just didn't go in. So I had to take my Dremel tool out with a metal grinding tool and grind it out so that those pins would fit in there. So that's another thing that you might face, that I certainly did. Here's the fuselage, and you know, it's EPO foam. You know, it is what it is. The servos for the rudder and the ailerons are sitting right below this gun turret. You glue that in afterwards. The wires from that thing were not fed through. They were just sitting here at the back, and there's no way to access these things. And the hole, the original access hole for this thing, was only that big, which is way too small, but pretty easy to cut open. So I cut it open, and then you have to fish, and that took a little while to fish that stuff out. But again, somebody threw it in there and never fed the wires through. So again, these are just quibbles right now. You can get them with any kit, but it kind of started to stack up with this product. The other thing was the rudder horn, the servo horn on the rudder, loose, about to fall off. I had to tighten that up. So make sure to check all your servo horns. Again, in the manufacturing process, somebody was sloppy. It would not have worked, and it would have disconnected on the first flight, and I would have had no rudder at all. The elevator, by the way, was way off. You'd have to just take out the clevis pins and screw those up. I mean, way off. So again, that's something you do on most kits, but it was certainly an issue. This airplane is 75-inch wingspan. It's probably 6.25-foot wingspan. It's a huge fuselage. This is the hatch. The hatch is 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. You gotta, for all the battery and all the wiring and everything, they got a tiny little hatch here, and that's kind of frustrating. That's in the design thing. So I think that's a bad design. There could have been a larger hatch, especially given the batteries you're going to put in this thing. You got a receiver. Some people like to put in a gyro. There's other wiring and so on. It's very hard to reach. So here's the landing gear, and they're real nice landing gear. They were great. They're very nice. Remember I mentioned those wires that go from each ESC to the motor? Well, those wires are just wound in there into sort of a weird little cluster, just kind of a tangle in there. They're kind of looped around and so on. Well, you need to tape those down because those can interfere with your landing gear. Sure enough, I know. Ask me how I know. I made in this aircraft today. Flew fine, took some trimming, but otherwise looks pretty in the air and it's great. But sure enough, the landing gear got snagged on those wires. And I'm coming in for my second landing of the day, and I'm flying around, noticing one gear is only partially coming down. I cycled the gear one more time, cycled the gear again. That one gear would not come down. Turns out it was hung up on those wires. And, having to land a large plane like this on one wheel is a difficult thing to do. If it was a beginner flyer or even a lower level intermediate, could have smashed the airplane. As it is, I came in and I landed on the good gear, but the good gear got so much lateral stress with that coming in on one gear, on one wheel, that I tore the gear out of its mounting. It's a pretty easy fix, but it's a little frustrating. It should have been taped down, or at least you should tape that down to avoid the problem that happened with me today. The other thing is with these cowls. All right, these are the cowls, the fairings, that aerodynamic fairings over the front of the motor, and they have little screws, little holes in them, and they have a little mounting. They have a pre-drilled mounting slot or hole for the screws to go in. If you follow those, as I did, the cowl will press up against the engine and prevent it from turning. All 4 of them were prevented from turning. And had I not checked that, and it's standard practice to check it, but had I not checked it, plugged it in, took it out to the field, or turned the motor up, or turned it on and cranked up the motors, I could have burned out the motors, I could have burned out the ESCs. Not a great way to start the day. So again, you're going to have to drill your own holes. Again, this is part of the manufacturing process. Very, very sloppy. Very, very, very sloppy. The biggest concern I have, though, with this thing, and this one is bad, this is real bad, is the published CG, center of gravity of this airplane, which is critical for any airplane. The manual I got indicated that the CG was supposed to be 38 to 45 millimeters from the tip of the wing back. Way off. That's way too far forward. I think there was an update later in one of the manuals, and it too was a misprint. It showed 38 to 45 millimeters from the front of the fuselage. That's about here. There's no way. You have to put an anvil in this thing for it to fly, to have a CG that far ahead, and of course it wouldn't fly. And there's just really nothing more critical than a CG for an airplane. And it just seems to me, if you're in the airplane RC model making business, job one is to find your proper CG and publish it properly. And if it turns out to be wrong, send out an advisory. But that's just sloppy. In fact, the manual itself is just horrible. And they even admit it. They say this manual is really not very complete. It's really for advanced flyer. You have to be an advanced flyer to be able to handle this thing. Well, I think that's just a cop-out, a lazy way of saying we wrote a lousy manual. There's maybe 3.5 pages dedicated to assembling this thing and flying it and so on. And there's almost 5 pages to decals. And by the way, on the positive side, the decals are extremely generous with this airplane. 2 sheets this size plus some other stuff, and you have different versions that you can decorate your airplane with and get different markings. And by the way, in the manual, they don't use pictures. They use really lousy and fuzzy diagrams that are really hard to follow. I'm an experienced flyer. I counted today, I have 52 airplanes, and I think that counts as an addiction. I've got foam, I've got balsa, I've got composite. I even got a Delta Wing Coroplast plane. I got them all. You know, I've tried them all. Above me sits my dad's Spirit of St. Louis that he got back in 1972. RC's been a long time in the family. I've gotten to know different airplanes. Again, when you get this thing set up nice, it's a nice plane. And I think it'll fly nicely for you. But there's a lot of stuff. It's a bit of a minefield here. A lot of stuff to set up, and but you know, if you get beyond that, you've got yourself a pretty good airplane. Anyway, that's it for today. That's all I've got. Happy flying, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments below, and I can address them to the best of my abilities. Take care.